It's a wonderful look at contemporary printmaking. To me, it's also a wonderful look at contemporary art. I like to emphasize that fact. Many of the artists are working specifically in print. Michael Barnes is a lithographer, and that's where all of his energy and intensity goes. Tom Huck is a woodcutter, and that's where his energy and intensity goes. But then you have Kiki Smith. I think contemporary artists' desire to do printmaking, which I suppose you could say could relate to Rembrandt, right? He made paintings, and then he made prints, which were a whole separate idea, and I think he understood what he was doing, that it would get a different audience, that more people could own it, more people could access it in a variety of different ways. And I think the same thing is happening here.
This is Platemark. I'm your host, Anne Shafer. I'm an independent curator, and I specialize in prints and printmaking, particularly contemporary prints. This is Series 3 of Platemark, in which I am interviewing the luminaries of the print ecosystem. I'm interviewing artists and gallerists, master printers, print publishers, curators, you name it. Today I have an interview with Elizabeth Wyckoff, who is the curator of prints and drawings at the St. Louis Art Museum. I had the opportunity to travel to St. Louis in August to see Elizabeth and also to see the exhibition she curated called Catching the Moment, Contemporary Art from the Ted L. and Maryanne Ellison Simmons Collection. The exhibition showcases the printmaking of a variety of artists working in that medium today, but it also includes a deep dive into 3 very special artists, Kiki Smith, Enrique Chagoya, and Tom Huck. But the whole exhibition pivots around a pairing of 2 prints, one of which I think it's safe to say is Maryanne and Ted's, I don't know if favorite is the word, but sort of their talisman. It could be the emblem for the entire collection. So stay tuned and find out which one that is. The show opened June 26th and sadly is closing in about a week on September 11th. But I wanted to get this episode out so that you might have a chance to go see it. It's really worth it. It's quite stunning. Accompanying me on my travels to St. Louis was the indomitable True Ludwig, so you'll hear him asking questions of Elizabeth as we go through the interview. It's always fun to have a bunch of print geeks in the same room. Before I get rolling, I want to mention my own positionality. I identify as a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. As always, any images that we talk about during any interview on Platemark are available to you over on the show notes, which you can find at platemarkpodcast.com. I'll also include any links that we talk about during the interview. And here's your call to action. If you know anyone who's interested in contemporary art or contemporary prints and printmaking, tell them about us. It would help us get the word out. Okay, buckle up and here we go. We are at the St. Louis Art Museum today with curator Elizabeth Wyckoff in the Print, Drawing, and Photograph Study Center.
We call it the study room for prints, drawings, and photographs.
And we're here in St. Louis. Me and True Ludwig are here in St. Louis because Elizabeth put on an amazing exhibition downstairs, and we wanted to come and talk to you about it. It's so stunning.
Thank you. It's delightful to be able to share the exhibition with colleagues and friends and people who appreciate and love prints and works on paper and multiples and all those kinds of wonderful things. So the exhibition is called Catching the Moment, contemporary art from the collection of Ted L. and Maryanne Ellison Simmons. The museum acquired the Simmons collection in late 2020. It consists of 833 works of art, kind of stunning number of things. The exhibition is meant to reflect the depth and strengths of the collection. It's been really extraordinary to work first with the Simmonses as lenders to an earlier exhibition, which was called Graphic Revolution, that I co-curated with Gretchen Wagner in 2018. The Simmonses were serious lenders to that exhibition, and a conversation began with the museum shortly after that exhibition closed. And then again, by the end of 2020, the entire collection was coming into the museum as a 50% purchase and 50% gift from the Simmonses. The collection dovetails with the museum's collection perfectly. There were a handful of duplicates, but really this was material that was not represented. There are 43 artists represented in the collection, 25 of them, I believe, were not even in the museum's collection at all. So it really builds on what was already a strength in not only the museum's collection, but also in St. Louis in general, in private collections. We call it the collection's debut. It will continue to be part of the museum and will appear both in the galleries, but also in the study room where anyone can make an appointment to come and look at the museum's collections.
I tell people all the time on every episode, I feel like, that museums everywhere have a study room for the study of works on paper, and that they are open to people, and all you have to do is make an appointment and say, I'd like to look at, 5 Durs or whatever it is you're looking at, and you should not hesitate to do so.
Absolutely. The study room in St. Louis is distinctive in that or at least when I arrived, it was largely academic groups. So college, even high school classes from the region. So across the river in Illinois, out to Columbia, Missouri, and the many, many institutions that are in St. Louis. So it's very active in that way. A lot of professors come and they come back and they come back again. And it's from, drawing and printmaking and photography teachers. There are also the German department, the Italian department. There's one class that has been taught from the sociology department, which is about death and dying. So there are also kind of thematic classes. So it's really been wonderful to watch all those different groups come in and to see new groups come in as time goes.
Do you talk to them, or do the professors come in knowing they have to talk? I always had some professors come in and look at you expectantly, and you'd be like, okay, I'm going to drop a lecture right here with no prep.
So there's a range of that. When I arrived, there was a study room manager who was a part-time research assistant, but she was an artist and an educator, and she loved talking and teaching. And we have really built on that program. So she has had 2 successors now, and we have decided to really thrive on that idea that if a group wants to come in and look at the museum's collection and want to be told about it, informed about it, engaged to converse about it, we are very happy to do that. And I think we are also lucky that we have now a full-time assistant curator whose job is to manage the study room. So she does other things as well. I think that's a kind of wonderful thing about this collection. We do also get the individuals or the professors who really want to teach themselves.
How many works are in your collection in terms of prints, drawings, photographs?
So about 17,000. It's actually grown. In the 10 years that I've been here, we've moved from saying we have circa 14,000 works on paper to 17,000. So it's been a moment of tremendous growth, largely because a number of private collections, some of which were sizable, have come in that time.
That's something that people might not know about St. Louis, is that other institutions may have many more things, but quality at St. Louis is really high. So you don't need 100 things behind the fabulous one, because you have the one, right? I mean, really an amazing collection.
Well, for instance, right behind Elizabeth, we're looking at right now Rembrandt's 100 Guilder print, A Sacrifice of Isaac, something that you made sure was here for me to visit, Berkmeyer, Lovers Being Interrupted by Death. It's an astonishing chiaroscuro woodcut. And then, well, tell them about the Rembrandt. Why do you folks have the one with the strip across the top that was glued back?
And this is Christ presented to the people, right?
It's an amazing thing. That was a major purchase in 1999. It is an incredible example. You look at it and you think, what's wrong with the top edge? And I suppose that's what Rembrandt thought too. So it's printed on Japanese paper. The plate was larger than standard sheets of paper, so he thought, first, let me just try to glue a little extra spot at the top. Eventually, he cut the plate down so that he wouldn't have to do that.
It's also interesting to see it because I think having seen it the way he decided for the final version, obviously he made the right decision. It's a stronger composition. Having that 1 inch removed is such a powerful inch.
I think that's another thing that people, if you don't have the opportunity to see things side by side, the same image side by side, to compare quality of impression, and maybe Elizabeth, you can tell us what we mean by a really good impression. What does that mean?
So with Rembrandt, for example, there's a massive range in the quality of impression. So ones that are printed under his supervision, in his lifetime, with his input, are the ones that we call a very high quality impression. And for Rembrandt and for the Christ presented to the people, or the Ecce Homo, as it's also known, the idea there is there's a lot of dry point burr. So there's a lot of that sort of dark, velvety, black, smoky areas, but there's also plate tone. And it also means that all of the lines print well. They print as deeply or as lightly as they're intended to. The distinctive thing about old master prints is that those plates often survived for centuries. Some of Rembrandt's plates still survive today, and some of them have been printed in recent memory and even are being sold in recent memory. But those later prints are a shadow of what they were in Rembrandt's lifetime, because a piece of copper is a relatively soft metal, and the more times you get it through an intaglio press, the less intense those lines are going to appear in the impression.
Thank you. Perfectly said.
A plus.
A plus.
And we have a lot. We don't have of that particular print, but we do have a number of prints where we have the beautiful lifetime impressions, and maybe the mediocre just after lifetime, and then some of the very late impressions. So if a class comes in and wants to look at that example, they can see that, because it's not an easy thing to grasp and to understand. And if you're just looking at one, as you said, really it doesn't necessarily come out.
And even though prints reproduce really well online, there is a tactility, particularly with my favorite intaglio, that there's a sculptural quality to the line. They stand proud, and you can't really grasp that online. So I always encourage people to go see things in person. It's so much better.
Well, and you also get a sense of scale, because online you never really know the scale, whereas when you're standing in front of it, you know that it's a tiny, packed little thing, or you know that it's actually a very large scale print when you think about a plate in the 17th century.
I'm kind of fascinated that that Rembrandt even conceived of making a plate that was bigger than the available paper. That seems like such an odd...
He was trying all those different
I guess
papers.
so.
He was being experimental, wiping in different ways. There's tons of plate tone on there. The burr is fantastic.
Gorgeous.
The one that's printed on vellum, it changes the character of the impression so mightily.
That's Abraham and Isaac about to be sacrificed, right?
Yep.
Right.
1655. It's just
1650.
delicious as it can be.
It is beautiful. I don't think I knew,
I've never seen it look that rich, ever.
and I didn't know it was on vellum.
And one of the wonderful things about this impression, too, and I think it's partly the vellum that it was on, there's also a little slippage right in the middle, and it's right where there's actually movement happening in the composition.
It just animates
It's
it
sort of a
even more.
mistake, but, did it work?
Well, we call that fairy dust in my world. When we're printing and something goes slightly sideways, that's
And it works.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sure Rembrandt looked at it and was like, woohoo! Let's go get a beer. Elizabeth, let's leave the museum for a minute, and why don't you tell us about you and your journey to where you are now?
I grew up in a kind of art-loving family, more on a kind of local thing, although we did travel, but we didn't really go to museums necessarily. I remember in high school seeing like a Georgia O'Keeffe show at the Metropolitan Museum. I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania, so right in between Philadelphia and New York City. And I went to college, being encouraged to do a practical thing, so I was interested in languages, and I seemed to be good at them, so I was majoring in German. And then I took a studio art class, and I had already liked making things, and so I ended up being a double major as an undergraduate.
I didn't know you were a studio art person.
There are many of us out here.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I remember in graduate school, I took a class on neo-impressionism with Jonathan Crary, and having that conversation was like, oh yeah, I was also Ed Ruscha was in my class, whatever. I didn't have Ed Ruscha in my class, but I was a studio major, and I did my junior year abroad in Vienna, so I had that European experience and thought I might go into art therapy, and didn't end up doing that. I moved to New York, ended up getting a job in the department of what was then the Department of Prints, Drawings, and Photographs at the Metropolitan Museum. I was the receptionist there, and I moved up through 3 kind of administrative positions.
But you thought you'd hit Shangri-La, like, I'm at the Met.
It was amazing. At the time, there were 1 million prints there. There were 6 or 7 curators who all had different experience. It was extraordinary. Curiously, for the Simmons Collection, one of their main advisors who really launched them and has remained steadfast as an advisor with them is David Keel, and he was a curator at the Metropolitan Museum at the time before he went to the Whitney. So he was also a very generous mentor to me. So it's a nice circular thing having that happen. But 6 years there. I took my work to the drawing center, and they were like, oh, isn't this nice? And then and simultaneously, I decided to apply for graduate school in art history. I did those two things simultaneously, thinking, something will happen somewhere. And I ended up going for graduate school at Columbia University. After I finished coursework, then I went and had 1 year as the study room manager at the Metropolitan Museum. That was my first real kind of professional experience then, and, had a couple of years living in Amsterdam.
What is your first love in terms of art, of print history?
It's hard to say first love, especially because I think many curators are responsible for everything. So I'm responsible from the late Middle Ages to tomorrow, I like to say. So it's hard to say. But yes, my first love was 17th century, so the pre-Rembrandtists. I focused on a print publisher named Jan Pietersz Berendrecht in Haarlem, and he actually published what are probably the first prints of Rembrandt and Levens with his name on them. And a handful of other printmakers who were not necessarily a group, but just looking at Haarlem, which was a very, very fruitful, generative place in the second and third decades of the 17th century.
So the market connoisseur, how do you even attack something like that?
Well, so partly market, a couple of people had preceded me in focusing on print publishers. So I thought, what about this Berendrecht guy? He was someone who was really, to me, is the closest parallel to the post-war American printer publishers who set up in the 50s and 60s and started reaching out to the young painters, the Rauschenbergs and Joneses and Lichtensteins, and inviting them to come in. So I think that's really what Berendrecht was doing.
He's Titania Grossman.
Exactly. But his output was very small in that area, and it wasn't all great. Some of it, like there is something that is signed Adrian Brauer Fake It, but it is an engraving, and it is definitely not etched by Brauer. So it's small and uneven. So therefore, I looked at Haarlem in general and what was happening. There are a lot of people who focus on Amsterdam and the market, and also I was looking in a slightly different direction there.
You lived in Amsterdam, but did you spend a ton of time in Haarlem?
I did. I had different phases. So when my first year, I got in Amsterdam and I got myself settled, and I said, okay, let me go to the Haarlem archive because I wanted to look in the archives. They also have a print collection.
I'm sorry, the City Archives has a print collection?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and there are kind of fabulous things there. The more Goltzius kinds of things went to the Tylers Museum, but the things that I was studying were landscapes and portraits and things like that, and they were more the archive seems to have been the appropriate repository for them. But I visited the archives once in that first fall, and I learned that I arrived on the last week when they would be open before they were going to close for several months. So that was a wonderful thing there where I managed to go. I realized Cornelis van Kittenstein lived and had his career in Haarlem, but he was from Delft. So I went to the Delft archives, and there Michael Montius had already been there, so it was a known quantity. So I spent a fair amount of time in Delft in the archives just looking and found out fascinating things about his family. And then I also wanted to look at prints. So I spent a month or two going to the Boijmans Museum in Rotterdam, so taking that hour train ride down and being left by myself in storage. And of course the Rijksmuseum just was kind of endless, an endless resource. But then there were also book illustrations. So I went to the various libraries. At a certain point I went to the archives in The Hague. So I went in a lot of different directions.
And how long were you there?
It was 2 years. And then I had another summer after that, but two solid years.
I think a lot of our listeners are practicing artists, practicing printmakers, and I think they all are like, well, that person has a PhD, but they don't really grasp how thoroughly and deeply some of the projects will take you down rabbit holes in Europe. To me, it's kind of overwhelmingly impressive.
But there are those strange little alleys, those tangents that turn into the path that you're going to go on, right? And it obviously must have funneled you into a slightly different finding for what you originally thought your disc topic would be.
Yes, I knew that I wanted to go to archives, but I had no idea what I would find. Like, for example, I went to where I thought Jan Pietersz Berendrecht seemed to have been born, and their archives were completely decimated for the period in which he would have been born. On the other hand, I had the Delft experience where I found much more than I dreamt that I would. The two sort of obvious ideas that came out of it were some of the book illustrations had to do with the history of the reception of tobacco in Europe. And that ended up being an exhibition that I did when I worked at the New York Public Library, because they had the Arendt's collection of tobacco-related literature and prints. Before that, just because I got interested in book illustration as a piece of that, I also did an exhibition that I co-curated at Columbia in their rare book room of the book arts in the Netherlands. So those little alleys that didn't really, like, I don't have a chapter in tobacco in my dissertation, but I was able to take that.
Because it touches on a socio-political kind of thing, other than a portrait of somebody who had money and wanted their picture painted, that it takes you to the tobacco, or it takes you to the different kinds of navigable paths and what that does. Even the concept of Delft in terms of it's linked to the Dutch East Indies Company. To me, that's the part of print history that it's so much richer than a single painting. It touches all of those tendrils, those rhizomes that go into those other fields.
And I would say also, because my first job out of college was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. How unbelievable. And in that department, which was founded by William Ivins in 1917, and just, thinking about Ivins. And then I arrived maybe a year after A. Hyatt Mayer had passed away, but his widow was still volunteering in the department. The memory of him was so important. The fact that he had brought in the Burdick collection of tobacco cards and trade cards and all those things. When I was the receptionist in the print room there, one of our most frequent types of visitors were little boys who collected baseball cards and wanted to see the Honus Wagner card that was in that collection. So as I started to think in my life, I probably want to do more than be an administrative assistant, even if I'm the administrative assistant to the head of the department. And one of the first things I read actually was William Ivins's Prints and Visual Communication. So that really is what sparked my interest in the history of prints. I loved that, just the idea of the communication, that it isn't just fine art, the masterpiece-y kind of painting thing.
That very first chapter, I used to make my students read that, because they'd start not thinking it's about art, it was about images and the transmission of ideas. It's so much richer, I think. We tend to pigeonhole things so heavily.
Where did you go to undergrad?
I went to St. Lawrence University.
Did they have print history? Ben and I talk about how we all kind of fall into print history but backwards, because there's no real route through academia until you get to a place where you can self-determine.
Yes, I do remember with Harlan Holliday, who taught the survey of art history at St. Lawrence University. I was a student worker, and one of my jobs was actually to take apart the Dover edition of the Triumphal Arch of Maximilian and put that together. And I think for decades that remained in the hallway in the art department. So yes, prints were actually a piece of that. Not that I necessarily thought that I was going to go into that, but it was definitely a piece of it. And then I think when I went, I think I was probably one leg up from other people who were applying for the receptionist position in the print department, because when the question came, do you know what the difference is between a lithograph and a woodcut? I could actually say, even if I hadn't made either of them, I had made screen prints, and I had a sense of what those things were. So that helped.
That's definitely a leg up. Yeah, I mean, I really fell backwards into it. Literally, I had no intention of doing it. There was an etching artist person who taught at my undergraduate school, but I didn't take anything from him. He was kind of a pill, so like I didn't, it wasn't until I was cataloging prints at the National Gallery that I was like, oh, I better learn how to tell the difference between these things. And it wasn't until Baltimore that I really dove into it. So fascinating. Like we're all just kind of
But it is, in
bootstrappy.
fact, it's the center of the universe.
Well, it is, of course, shared visual culture.
Yeah.
That era's internet, of course. We talk about it all the time.
Yep.
Yeah.
This print was Jer's website.
Yeah, for sure. I also always ask people if they've decided what their fictitious retirement gift would be from the collection you are in charge of.
Well, I would say I have an actual retirement gift, which are the memories. I mean, in a couple decades long career, amazing things have happened. The trajectory and the acquisition of certain objects which are very memorable, the people that I've met, from fellow print curators of all shapes and sizes to the various collectors to the dealers along the way. For me, there's just an incredible amount of memories. In my retirement, I feel that I should be getting rid of objects rather than bringing them in.
In terms of collectors, how unique was it for you to work with a Hall of Fame catcher, and who came up with the title for the exhibition, Catching the Moment?
I think it's fairly unusual to find a Hall of Fame switch hitter and catcher who has dug that deeply and seriously into anything. And the contemporary print part of it is just one of a whole line of other things, which include 18th century American furniture on a very high level, as high a level as the contemporary printmaking. So the title, actually, we were certainly looking at, baseball-ish metaphors, but not wanting to be too obvious. And the title that became the title of the interview, which is Out of Left Field, which was the one that was circulating in our curatorial heads, and our head of design talked to his friends and came back with Catching the Moment. So I've got to give credit where credit is due.
It's so apt. It's wonderfully deft.
Yep. Because the point is, for those of you out there listening who may not have seen the show, the part of the Simmons collection is very much that they were collecting artists of their own time who were responding to the same issues that were the issues that have embraced them or engrossed their lives for many decades.
Yeah, we had a chance to go through the show yesterday. It's a stunning exhibition, and I encourage people, wherever you are, to make the trip before September 11 is the last day of the show. And it's well worth the trip, just because, you hardly ever see that many prints in one place. If you're
Of that caliber.
particularly of that caliber, and it's a really wonderful deep dive into several specific artists. So tell us who the highlights are.
So the Simmons collection includes a number of artists who are collected in depth, and three are really very defining for the collection. The first one is Kiki Smith. And so the first thing you encounter is Kiki Smith's finger bowl, which was also the first object that was the deep dive into saying, yes, we are committed to collecting contemporary art. And then they went on to collect, 60-some of her prints, which is certainly not all of her output because she's been very, very prolific, but it's a significant amount of objects. And what's distinctive about it, too, I think, is that it is prints, and prints in all different media, prints with all different printer publishers that she's worked with, but it's also textiles and bronzes and a book and a collaboration, a kind of collaborative sculpture that she made with Richard Tuttle. And a blanket and puppets, reversible puppets as well, a ceramic piece. So yeah, it's a really wonderful range of the kinds of work that she's done in multiple. The second artist who is important for the collection is Enrique Chagoya. There was an exhibition of his work in the late 90s in St. Louis, which introduced them. And they have aimed to track down every print project and every book or codex project that he's done as well. So they may not have 100%, but it's very, very close to that. And then Tom Huck, who is an artist that Maryanne actually encountered when she was working at Island Press, when Tom Huck was a graduate student. They were both at Washington University in St. Louis, and Maryanne continued to work with what is now Island Press, which is the university press where students collaborate with the printers and with artists who come in. With Tom, they have endeavored to not only collect every printed project that he has published, but also the blocks for 10 of those projects and over 100 drawings and a number of sketchbooks as well. So you really get a sense of Tom as an artist, how he's thinking, how he's pulling things together. St. Louis really is now the center for Tom Huck studies. And with a certain amount of justice, because I'm sure there are many people out there who will already know this story, but when Tom was a teenager, he discovered Albrecht Dürer, and his parents brought him to the museum, to the study room for prints, drawings, and photographs on an annual basis to look at the museum's collection. So that's where he really had regular, direct access with actual works of art and prints in particular.
I think that's one of the special zhuzh of Tom, is that he presents things in a woodcut aesthetic that will appeal to a very sort of young rock and roll tattoo sort of aesthetic. Stories that are packed with lots of deep thinking about society and what's going on and what's good and bad, but also with this real nod to art history, which, I mean, who doesn't love, of course, we who love Old Master Prince, like, how can you not love a contemporary artist who knows his stuff? He knows upon whose shoulders he stands. They're really something.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's a wonderful Platemark podcast in which he talks exactly about that, I think in a very elegant way.
Yeah, we had a chance to sit down with him in his studio when we first got to St. Louis a couple days ago, and so we have an update episode coming. So stay tuned.
It's true.
And you did include the blocks. Did you include more blocks than just the one triptych?
In the end, we included just the blocks, the 3 birchwood blocks for the Snack Time Mercy triptych.
And that's such a rare opportunity to see, just to watch the museum visitor look at the block and be able to ping pong back and forth. It's so beautifully presented. I can't even tell you how thrilled I am with what you've accomplished there. Just in terms of the thematic groupings in the rooms and the obvious shift from one topic to the next. There's so much variety, but it's comprehensible because of the way you organized it, and it's thrilling.
I mean, all I can say was amazing material to work with, and we were 3 co-curators putting all of that together in very short order, but 3 curators coming from 3 different directions that really helped build that narrative. We all had our interests.
We were able to talk with Maryanne and Ted yesterday, so they did tell us some wonderful stories about collecting and took their lives together, going back to junior high school.
Yeah.
52 years of marriage.
Yeah.
So impressive.
It's crazy.
Yes.
Yeah.
They really are co-collaborators on that, too.
Yeah, totally.
It's very dear.
I was familiar with Kiki Smith and Chagoya and obviously Huck, but the single eye-opener for me was Jaune Quick-to-See Smith and those collagraphs. I had never seen them in person before. I mean, I was tangentially aware of them and her work. But boy, talk about scale making the difference and seeing them up close. Like online, they kind of, to me, looked like etchings of whatever nature, variety of mark making techniques. But man, those are something.
Right.
How easy was it for you to say, oh, those are definitely going to be in? I mean, you had plenty of choices to make, but
in the exhibition?
Yes.
There was no question to me that they would be in. I mean, she's such an important artist, and she's beginning to get more widespread. I mean, she's always been a serious and well-respected artist, but she's starting to get much more widespread attention. And I mean, the museum actually just acquired a painting by her in the last year. So for me, it was incredibly exciting to be able to do that.
Catching the Moment is the title of the show. The kinds of topics that she was dealing with the 40,000 years of American art, it is so intensely timely to this moment, too. And it's just to see those things played across the wall, with the allusions to petroglyphs, but also of the very timely, very present now. And I'm still delighted with the fact that it's done with, inexpensive media that makes it look like the world's most beautiful, big piece of copper, which is incomprehensibly large, And Tom was all excited in telling us last night about having been one of the printers for a couple of those, too. So now I've got some hot tips on how to ink up my enormous collagraphs. Printmakers do that,
Yeah, we're gonna go
What
play.
are we doing in the kitchen?
We're gonna go play in the studio.
I would add there, what's also nice about those works by Jaune Quick-to-See Smith is that it's also a St. Louis story. The scale of it, the fact that they are collagraphs, is because she was invited to what was then Washington University's School of Art Collaborative Printmaking Workshop. And she worked with Peter Marcus, who was a master of the collograph, who had helped to design these massive presses, which were much larger than your average press, so the scale could happen. And Peter was there to help her learn what a collograph was and how to manipulate it. The master printer at the time was Kevin Garber. Maryanne Ellison Simmons was also there at the moment. So there's also a wonderful local story that is a very important story about American history. And I love that also she did those at that moment in the mid-90s, which followed the celebration of Columbus's arrival in the New World. And so it's just that print, Celebrate 40,000 Years of American Art, was also a different impression, but that print was a major centerpiece in the first gallery of Graphic Revolution, that 2018 exhibition of post-war American prints that we organized here. So I've been in love with that print since then, and just thinking about that incredible moment, defining what is American art, I think that is just so crucial Yeah.
Well, it sadly is really a simple idea, but everybody needs to be bonked over the head, and now is the moment where people are finally paying attention. So it's great that it's all on the wall like that and so powerfully presented, because you can't avoid it.
Pay attention. Right?
Yeah, you can't avoid it. Yeah. Oh, and let's talk about the pairing of Bruce Nauman's Pay Attention and Kara Walker's Keys to the Coupe. Who came up with that one?
So that gallery, we named it Pay Attention after Bruce Nauman's lithograph, in which is written "Pay Attention," followed by an obscenity. It's right in the center of the exhibition, too. So I think that to me is key. It was also kind of a key central moment. That gallery is really about artists thinking about current events and responding to current events. It's not always in an obvious way. The events are not always absolutely current when you think of Kara Walker responding to 19th century slavery, but also its after effects. So to me, putting those two pieces together gives you a wonderful contrast of the different kind of methods, the different kinds of ways that artists approach important but difficult ideas. So Kara Walker showing you a completely visual way, but also a very pared down visual way. It's just black and white, it's the silhouette, but you get every ounce of what she's trying to say with that image. And then Bruce Nauman, who he's working with lithography, on the stone, he's writing in the correct direction, knowing that when it's printed, you're going to have to figure it out in reverse. So he kind of grabs you there because you're like, okay, what does that say? It's in reverse. Oh, that's what it says. So he's already making you stop and pause. And then what he says is also making you pause and think. So these different kind of devices that the artists are using and ways of saying, okay, I want your attention and I want you to pay attention to what is happening around you.
It's Bruce Nauman's "The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters." And the fact that you've got by Goya, and then adjacent to that are Chagoya's take on Goya, and it's that whole line of that continuum of thought, and the urgency of what printmaking can do is also just it's riveting, and it's so profound because there's more than one of a thing, and so it had to have made that voice heard in so many places.
The other thing that strikes me about listening to you talk about thinking through the presentation, first of all, the show, in a really wonderful nutshell, puts forward why prints are so great. But also what you're sharing and what I'm hoping to do with interviews with all of these various roles within the print ecosystem, as I call it, is this idea that I think a lot of people probably don't realize how much thinking goes into the presentation part. We talked to James Wen, and he said, I went to graduate school because I started wandering museums and I really loved looking at the way things were installed, as opposed to coming into it because they were a scholar of Rembrandt or in his case, Israel van Meckenem. And I think people sometimes don't really even notice. If it's done well, you don't even notice it, right? But there's a lot of thinking and passion that goes into it, and I love that you can help people understand how that comes about.
Yeah, no, I mean that's one of the joys of being a curator, right? Is thinking about how you're going to organize. I think the question is, how are the works going to speak to each other? Are they going to complement each other? Are they going to contrast with each other? I think the Kara Walker and the Bruce Nauman is a great example of that. But also just thinking, like in the gallery with Kiki Smith, there are also her peers and friends, Peter Hujar and David Wojnarowicz and Paul Tech, who were artists that the Simmonses looked to because they were thinking about who Kiki Smith was thinking about and who she was interacting with. So to be able to put them together, that wasn't easy, to put photographs and black and white prints together with the range of Kiki Smith. So that gallery definitely went through a number of iterations, but how satisfying to see the way it came out.
And it's not just lined up on 60 on center, but it's also presenting a landscape of thought to your visitors too. It's amazing that you've created these kinds of mental and thoughtful landscapes too, of works that could seem so disparate, but they harmonize. And I think even the Simmonses, it was made visible to them there, and having them talk about how it gave them new eyes. Also that they hadn't seen their children framed before.
They did talk about that a lot. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the first thing I want to say if I haven't said it before, it is incredible material to be working with. So, and I think we could do that show again and again and again. But it would also be nice to bring it in combination with the rest of the museum's collection, too. Even thinking, Anne, back to what you were saying in the beginning of this question about it's a wonderful look at contemporary printmaking. To me, it's also a wonderful look at contemporary art. I like to emphasize that fact. Gretchen Wagner, my co-curator with Graphic Revolution, really helped me to see that this is contemporary art and that many of the artists are working specifically in print. So Michael Barnes is a great example where he's a lithographer and that's where all of his energy and intensity goes. Tom Huck is a woodcutter and that's where his energy and intensity goes. But then you have Kiki Smith. She's doing a lot of etching herself, but she's also reaching out and working with other people. Enrique Chagoya knows how to make prints, but he's also going to some of the most experimental and expansive publishers, printer publishers out there. So it's these people's engagement with these things, and I think contemporary artists' willingness and desire to do that with their printmaking, which I suppose you could say could relate to Rembrandt, right? He made paintings and then he made prints, which were a whole kind of separate idea, and I think he understood what he was doing and where he was going with that it would get a different audience, that more people could own it, more people could access it in a variety of different ways. And I think the same thing is happening here.
Yeah, I've long espoused the idea that printmaking is something that many artists do as a regular part of everything else that they do, and that it's kept off to the side because it's a bit esoteric. It's sometimes hard to get in if you don't have a full grasp of the technique stuff. That it really is intertwined, and I've always wanted to make that much more clear for people.
It also has always been intertwined. When you think about Rembrandt, when you think about the people that I studied in my dissertation, Esaias van der Velde was one of them. He was a painter. He was someone who made one of the first painted Dutch landscapes in the early 17th century, but he also was invited somehow by Berendrecht to make etchings. So he made also these extraordinary etchings, which are the same format that Callot's etchings are when you think about his oblong landscape. So I think it's always interconnected. The important takeaway that I have taken away from my decades in the print world is that don't just look at prints in isolation. The way to look at it is to think about how it fits in to the rest of that artist's work and also to the rest of art history that's happening.
Each print isn't necessarily a standalone. It's like a sentence in a paragraph, and that paragraph is also in reference to what other work they're doing in other media. And it's also interesting to see how the prints can bump up the caliber of their thinking in 2D or 3D painting, what have you. It seems almost as though if you haven't tried printmaking, famous artist person, this will really help you become a better artist. It's more thinking and deeper. That concept of if you're going to make something in multiples, you better know what you want to do. I really feel that you start to see further into an artist's mind in print, I think, than in painting, because that's just so, who's going to buy it, as opposed to, I'm going to make this, put it out there because it'll sell, but it's also what I think. It's very edgy to me. It's thrilling.
Right. I would say paintings still have their own thing, but there are a number of artists, including Kiki Smith and Julie Moretu is another one, who say my involvement with printmaking completely impacted and changed the way. There are a number of artists who will be very, very upfront about that. To me, printmaking is also, it's a problem to solve. I think about, Nauman is kind of like, oh, what is this thing, lithography? Oh, there's reversal. Okay, let me play with that reversal thing. But it's the fact that you have to go in and think about the image in the reverse, or say you don't care about it in the reverse, and the various steps. A drawing or a painting has a certain immediacy, theoretically, whereas a print doesn't have quite the same thing. You're working on the matrix. In most cases, depending on your relationship with it, but but it's that kind of problem that you have to solve. That is one step on the way to the thing that ends up on the wall.
Ben and I talked about this many episodes ago, just about how each point is a decision, right? And it gives you time to consider, slows you down, makes you think, and it comes out stronger for it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, printmakers rule. Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Yeah, I know you have to get on to work, so we will stop there. But everybody, come see the show. It's really fantastic. And don't forget, St. Louis has a great collection.
come and look at prints in our galleries, and also come to our study room for prints, drawings, and photographs, where anyone can come and look at things firsthand, often out of the frame, right up, get your nose right up to it.
All of the information about how to make appointments is on the website, so it's pretty easy to find.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks, Elizabeth. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your expertise and your deep thinking. It's marvelous.
Thank you. It's wonderful to have a dialogue with other people who are thinking deeply.
Cheers.
Thanks for coming to St. Louis.
Of course. Thanks for listening to this episode of Platemark with Elizabeth Wyckoff, the curator of prints and drawings at the St. Louis Art Museum. As we talked about over and over again, the show, Catching the Moment, is only up until September 11th, 2022. So if you're anywhere near St. Louis, get in the car and go check it out. Thank you to Elizabeth for sitting down with us. It was great talking to her. And also, as always, I need to thank Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. A reminder that all of the images and any website links will be over on the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. And once more, the call to action is tell a friend about us. We will see you next time.